Hello, everybody. This is Brannen Temple. I'm a drummer from Austin, Texas, and I've had the privilege of working with so many greats. And I'm humbly here to say welcome. And you're listening to Talking Blues.
Brandon, I want to start. I think you met your drum set before you actually started playing drums. If I understand this correctly, you saw your first drum set maybe years before you actually got it. Can you talk about that?
Sure. My mother uh, was a member of a church here in Austin, Texas, which is where I live, where I'm from, and it's a Ebenezer Baptist Church, and it was the second one. The first one was, of course, the one in Atlanta that Martin Luther King Sr. was a preacher and that sort of thing. And so we had the second one, and then it's in Austin, Texas. It was founded, the last 150 years or so, and they just celebrated an anniversary. Anyway, so as a child, I was there for many occasions, whether it was just to be, an attendee or for various programs or something. But at age, I'm gonna say 4. Might have been a little earlier. This is some of the first memories I had. Um, I saw this orange sparkle 4-piece drum kit, and it kind of winked at me. I don't know if it did or maybe it's just the lighting, but the lighting wasn't, so dynamic. So something spoke to me. And after the service was over, I just found myself walking down that aisle until I got to it, and I just stared at them, and we just made a connection. It's an inanimate object, but somehow it was speaking to me, and I listened. But that was at age 4. I didn't actually uh, get in line to be a contender to play drums or a musical instrument until, well, what are you in the age sixth grade, whatever that is.
Okay, probably
Um, you
around
know,
12 or something.
or a little younger, I would say. So maybe even closer to 9 or 10.
Okay.
And so I wanted to join the sixth grade band, which would have been symphonic band. And, having come from a family of sort of musicians and athletics and different things like that, when music was put in front of me, I could read it. I could read rhythms without ever having known that I could read the rhythm. I never was challenged to do it, but I'd seen music from my sisters and piano or violin or flute and different things like that. So I knew what notes were. I didn't know that I knew note value. And I was able to read through. And uh, the band director was shocked. He was like, okay, great. I got one. And we moved forward. And soon thereafter, it was like, well, I guess we're going to need some gear. So my mother went and got me the proper practice pad and bell set that was required for a student. And I just kept showing aptitude and was like, no, we're going to need some other things here. So at the time, my sister, who was the violinist and pianist, or mostly violin, she was married to a gentleman who was, in fact, the owner of that drum set many years prior to that. And so he was not playing at the time, and he gifted me those instruments. And that was my beginning.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is very crazy.
Did you remember it immediately when you saw the orange sparkle drums?
I think I told him later that they spoke to me, but I don't think I mentioned that in the moment. But I always knew he was the owner of the drums, because he wasn't a full-time member of the church I grew up in, but his family was associated with the church. And then him being a musician, you just float around, you're playing at different events, especially back then. There wasn't much of a, let's call it a club scene. I mean, there was Chitlin Circuit, especially for, black musicians and certain things like that. But, you know, maybe not necessarily clubs that my brother-in-law would have been involved in. So the church events, community events, and there was, So my first foray into music was also that church and community.
And that played a big part in your upbringing of music, no?
Absolutely. I mean, without, this idea of fellowship through like-mindedness, whether it's through, triumphs or struggle through a people, whether your people are all musicians or all sailboat operators. I mean, there's a vibe, there's a community of understanding, and I happen to have that in a really close knit environment here in Austin, Texas, on the east side of town, which is where was dominated by segregation and the black area of town. And so I played through there at an early age. And, I tried to get to it as quickly as I could. And my mother, at age 14, she told me when I was 14, I was trying to play some gigs with a band I was putting together in high school or somewhere along those lines. And she was like, no, 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 it's going to be time for that. I'm not going to let you go and do that just yet. And I was heartbroken, but she was right. There was plenty of time. And, thankfully 40 years of, plus years of professional, career, I'm still here thriving. And I've never had another job. This is what I do.
When do you think you thought, this is what I want to do?
Then,
Immediately?
yeah, immediately, I already knew it. I never, when you're growing up, you have this idea of sort of a necessity from the community of like, okay, well, you got to grow, you got to be a doctor, you got to be a lawyer, you have to do these type of a teacher, these sort of reputable career choices that would, honor your community, honor your parents, honor yourself, and these various things. And although I grew up in a very what I feel is conservative and liberal, obviously community. We were, um, my parents being in administrative and educational and also athletic backgrounds. That's pretty wide range. And being lovers of music, it was not out of the realm of possibilities for their children to, to follow those paths. So yeah, I kind of always knew, I think I thought in my mind I liked math until it got hard. and, and then, I went and, I followed drums and I never really looked back. Even at age 6, I was already, that band director, Mr. Garcia. He's passed since then. Many of my band directors have gone on and, but I'm grateful for each and every one of them. But, um, he took me around to other schools almost as a recruiter, you know, to show other students what was possible. And I
Wow.
literally just picked up a set of drumsticks and was reading, piece of paper in front of me. And I quickly understood, without understanding, that I had a pretty developed ear, which means that I could play what I heard, back to you. If you played something, I could play it back, and I didn't necessarily have to rely on the paper, in the world of gigging as a touring drummer or a touring professional who maybe doesn't do classical works. I do many improvised works or many interpretive works, and so it's up to me to interpret, what I feel is going to be the best solution musically. And so, yeah, but I had that coming into the game. It's not that uncommon if you really think about it, but it was special.
I don't understand how you knew how to read so early, though. Like, got.
I saw the notes. Again, it's like one of my sisters used to play flute, and she was in a marching band. So on the flute, they have the mouthpieces here, you playing. But in marching band, they had this setup that put the music in front of you so you can read it as you're,
Right.
marching. and as a reference. And so I just always saw music. I always saw the notes. I would see and like listen to her, and I didn't know I was following along, but I was. The same thing as my other sister Adrian was playing piano. I was sitting there watching what her left hand did in the bass. And that's the thing that I always listened to. Even as a child, hearing music, the first thing I listened to was the bass. Drums was not the first thing I heard. I James Brown, I was listening to, I didn't know it, but it was either Fred Thomas or Bootsy Collins or, Charles Sweets. I didn't know these guys' names. Or if it was Funkadelic, I was listening again to, Bootsy or any number of the musicians that came through that era, Boogie, Monsoon or, the other bass players. And, we listened to a lot of R&B, listened to a lot of gospel, anything from Ray Charles. My dad, coming from New York, he listened to everything, classical, Afro Cubano, and of course, soul music of the time, reaching from Stax, Memphis to Detroit, Motown, and onward up into the 70s with Philly sounds and records coming out of LA and New York. A lot of things out of New York.
I think if I read correctly, I think you're a huge fan of the Jackson Five.
As a kid, definitely, man. I couldn't get away from it. You see yourself in a sound and a image, and I did. And I think I was not alone in the world. Many children, either saw, you hear young ladies talk about as a young girl, oh, Tito's mine, or Jermaine was mine. Michael was my favorite. Or whatever. I thought Randy was cute. But myself, I tried to grow my afro. I guess I'm still trying to do that somewhat. But and that was the hairstyle of the day. Yeah, I did everything I could to sort of model myself after the young Jackson Five.
When you went to school, it was, I presume, a jazz band that you were
Con-
into.
con- concert initially,
Oh,
concert band.
okay. So classical.
Well, concert means everything from you could even be playing when the Saints go marching in, and it's written out for a stage band or
Right,
written out for a concert style band, which could be classical in its shape
right.
physically. But we weren't addressing things that string players were addressing. Concert band more is like different composers that are writing music to be presented with woodwind, brass, and percussion instruments. But it's still classically
Right.
based.
Okay. So that was one part of it. You also played in church, which I presume would be church music, gospel.
Right, but mostly, I grew up in a church that was, focused on hymnals, and it happened to also be a church that focused on original music, which was really interesting. So,
No?
we had artists there, Miss D Woody and some other artists that were very prominent, and they had their own compositions. One of my mentors, Dr. Jones, Beulah Agnes Curry Jones, who's still with us and doing her thing. Man, great touch on the piano, even to this, she's playing less and less now. But, someone who really took me under her wing. But yeah, it was just a nod to the original, to the mind, absorbing the concepts of the greats or those that were peers or aspirations, but also trying to say, well, okay, well, what's my voice? And so I grew up in that environment, at the church. I didn't even know it. I didn't know that's how I was growing up, but it suited me later in life, whether I was becoming just a side musician who had to interject, the right choices to make to propel the band, or later in leading my own bands. Not much later, I started that at a pretty early age too.
I wonder though, as you were growing up, and I don't know if it's a sign of times, but you probably started off being in bands.
Well, yeah, even when I was growing up at age, 4, 3, 4, and 5, there were, my sisters were in bands and in orchestras, and we had back in the day, you had neighborhood bands,
Right.
musicians that were just, you know, getting it together in the garage. They had the garage door open on a spring day, summer day, winter day, be a little more muffled because the garage door is down. But you're hearing the grooves, and people are working it out. It's like, oh, I hear saxophone, I hear drums, I hear bass, I hear guitar. And, Austin was just a musical environment. It wasn't unlike any other parts of the world, any of America and Black America for sure. We still had music programs in school for the most part, as the 70s hit, certain areas like New York and various areas tried the thing where they removed art and music programs and different things out of school. And so, you saw what happened there. A lot of things happened, but one of the most triumphant things that happened was in a naysay of that environment, which was hip hop. Hip hop came out of the idea that we're taking music away from the youth. It was an experiment that actually backfired, and it became the global success and the reach that it has today. You know,
I mean, Austin's always known as a music town. Was it always a music town when you were growing up? Was it a
yeah,
huge
because if you look at most of America, let's take San Francisco Fillmore District, which
Mhm.
was a black area. Let's look at Harlem, which is a black area. All of these places were places where, excuse me, where you had black folks just trying to live. They take care of their families, so they're bringing their ideas and their businesses and their wants and drives and desires and placing them as seeds to to bear fruits in the environment. So you have doctors and lawyers and all the things that we love and enjoy. But then you also had cleaners and hospitals and grocery stores and these businesses and all these things. And so and entertainment and athletics and you name it, apothecaries and so that's herbal science. We had it all. And in those areas like Harlem, and of course we know about the Harlem Renaissance and the importance in the Fillmore district. And one of the main things that was relevant to what we're talking about is music. And so, because of segregation and Jim Crow or Crow Jim, I like to call it, good old the thing that I feel like is actually never really left. But you had segregation, so the black groups were not allowed to stay and play at different places. If we played in certain facilities, of course, we know the drill. You couldn't walk through the front door. You couldn't eat there. You couldn't fraternize with the guests. Blah blah blah. And so, well, all right, fine, we'll have our own. And that's what was great to me about segregation. Was the art and acts of doing for self, for the community, and thriving and encouraging one another. I grew up with 20 mothers. You know what I'm saying? I
Mhm.
grew up with 15 fathers. Every man I know that was my dad's friend, you know, for the most part, I was under the impression had my best interest. Whether they did or not, it was how I grew up,
Right.
you know. And so then Chitlin Circuit, that's what the thing I was trying to get to. So you had clubs that basically would cater to our community. And if, other communities wanted to join in, for the most part, they were welcome, whether it was Latino or, white or whatever else was going on at the time. Of course, in San Francisco, you already had, Asians that were coming in. So that all those all that was melting together. All the foods were beginning to fusion without labeling it, love, music, all these things that we see now are because of the times of segregation and just being like, nah, that doesn't really work for the level of capitalism and separatist movements.
So when you decided to pursue music, you said you was trying to start a band at 14 and your mom said it's too early. But at one point or another,
That gig didn't happen, by the way. It turned out to be a complete bust anyway, so I would have been very disappointed. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
but at one point or another, you you pursue being a professional musician. And I believe at that point it was to join a band. What was that band? Or how did that come about?
Just through school, guys that, you know, oh wow, I saw you playing at All City, man, if you would like to, join a band, we got the thing going on. Oh yeah, sure. Or, I did a documentary interview once, and people like to say it's who you know, but really, in essence, it's who knows you. It's how people see you and view your skills, and how can your skills be of use to them. You know, and so often I was getting cold phone calls, and therefore asked to be join, to join a gig or to a situation. Or one thing will blossom to the next. You play somewhere and you get someone asks for your phone number. You know what I mean? And it's just a snowball of events, whether it's being at the right place at the right time, or someone just seeing your potential and wanting to explore that, with you and through maybe their own lens.
But when you first started, I presume you were in a band as opposed to a freelance musician. Or
Well,
were
I was
you?
in community bands. I did community marching band. I did community jazz bands. I did school stage bands, school marching bands, school bands for football games, basketball. I was just in all kinds of environments that were music. So it was not a singular thing, and some of those actually got paid, made money. Of course, playing in church and different things like that. And just such a, I just grew up with such a encouraging environment. Again, man, I'm where I am because like that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. I'm where I am because of people's love.
And your talent, I presume.
Well, yeah, if you don't have it, you got to hang it up. Hang up the sticks, as my cousin once said. I wouldn't be telling you all this stuff if you wouldn't. I would have told you to hang up the sticks a long time ago. Is what one of my cousins told me. And but yeah, blessed, talent and development of skill, and just taking it serious. In fact, I should be practicing now
How much do you practice at this point?
every day, every day. Often, any any anything from 5 minutes to 6 hours, 7 hours.
And 6 or 7 hours would constitute, like I understand that with the recent Taj Mahal tour, you got a call saying, would you join this tour?
Mhm.
I think you guys had 1 day of rehearsal, but you had to learn the material a
Mhm.
month ahead of time or something.
A little less than that,
Okay.
but learn the material. And I coming from a background of the concert band, marching band, orchestral band environment, playing with choirs and strings as well. I did do some orchestral work, playing as a young high schooler. So, I could write my own charts, and even if I had to give those charts to someone else, they can read them without it being like, I don't, it's a chicken scratch, it's like, it's an actual roadmap of what the music entails.
Right.
So I relied on that in the first, week and a half or so of the gigs with Taj Mahal, for instance. So it wasn't completely all memory, but it's just a point of reference. Oh yeah, that's I got to remember that feel, and I don't want to not have the proper tools to support the music. You know, so I want to be able to look at it. You know, I'm blessed with sight, as well as memory, so I'm going to use all my tools to be able to make it happen. So nobody's looking at me crazy.
But when did you become like the number of different people you've worked with? And you said it's oftentimes because they saw you and they call you up and say, "Hey, will you come and help us?" or whatever. But
Right.
when did you decide that your role would be a session person or somebody who gets called to join a tour?
Yeah, all those things are organic. It's like one thing just leads to the next. I've I've never made a declaration about any one thing. I was and am an educator. You know, I do recording sessions with everything from folk to funk. From reggae to roots, from orchestral, movie soundtracks to pop records, and it just varies. And then the same thing with playing live gigs. Gospel to hip hop, or singer songwriter Americana to jazz and swing jazz and traditional jazz and Latin jazz and blah blah blah. So you just acquire knowledge. Of course, if you have some sort of aptitude, it helps. But you know, you don't come to the party necessarily knowing how to play everything. And sometimes you're introduced to a style of music and you're pretty sad at it. You have to like spend time with it and practice it. What are the tenets of this music? Pretty much in drums, the main thing is going to be support. And so, that is a fundamental, but then support can vary because it could be more language communicative, it's like if I'm playing behind a country artist and there's not maybe a lot of, or a blues artist where I'm not necessarily trying to solo. I don't have solos,
Right.
in, uh, in most of those environments many times. But sometimes you might play with the folk artist that turns around and gives you about two or three, 2 bars, 4 bars, 8 bars. Oh, okay, I better say something. And so, context is very important. So, what what makes sense talking to my friends about race cars might not make the same sense talking to these friends about cooking, or these friends about, African diaspora, or these friends about, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So you have, so you're studying language throughout, and that's all it is.
But often musicians are put in cylinders. And maybe that's not even the case, but so
Oh, it
there
is.
are some go-to drummers who are very good at blues, and there are some people who are very good at jazz, some people who are good at singer-songwriter. You seem to go across the board, and I don't know how that happens.
I don't either, but it's all subjective, because I have self confidence, but it doesn't mean that I'm great. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there
Yeah.
might be somebody that can play what I'm playing. They can play circles around it, play it, to the liking of the band leader. I've been hired and fired by the best, baby. you know, and so but nonetheless, I am grateful that I'm able to hear and have the width, the breadth of knowledge and the idea to acquire it. It's like, well, how do you play with Cuban musicians who typically don't play, but have the drum set involved in the music, traditional. what is my role? You know, so I had to study with guys that did that to figure it out. Same thing with, I could come to the table. I could say I can play a backbeat. Well, backbeat is very generic because to play with Aerosmith or, P-Funk with Rick James or Prince, there are certain things that are very similar, a certain amount of confidence and drive and sound and consistency and intensity that have to be there. And mind you, I've not played with any of those artists. I don't want people to get the idea that I've worked with any of them, but I'm just saying as an example. But then within certain things, AC/DC, Kiss, there's going to be a nuance that you bring to the table playing that kind of rock, whether or versus whether you're playing with funk musicians. It's just language that's spoken. How you hit the drums, where you hit the drums, how you lead the musicians in. A lot of similarities, but a lot of subtle differences. And so just having the ear to hear it, the audacity to try to be around those musicians to learn it, you know, and how dare you? Because sometimes you can get into a situation with cats and you can be well in the weeds, you know, they're swimming laps around you because you're not used to doing that. I have a group of Brazilian cat musicians that I play with. I didn't grow up with that music, you know. I had to learn what not to do, you know, and still learning from these fine musicians of how to support them so they can feel at home, you know.
Do you? I mean, do you have a preference? I get the feeling that might be jazz, but because you play so many different kinds of music, I mean, it's quite different from for you to play with Taj Mahal versus Eric Johnson versus Chris Smither versus Eric Burden. Like each one of them are very, very different. Do you have in yourself a preference?
Oh, you know, my preference is love and respect and understanding.
It doesn't matter what kind of music.
Yeah, because and so I find balance in the fact that I get a chance to do everything. You know, the creator blessed me with the ability to and the audacity to try, and so yeah, so then I'll get on a rock gig, a folk gig, a roots gig, a jazz gig, and do my homework and hope for the best. Hope that what I am contributing is satisfying and supportive for those around me. 'Cause that's what it is. You're playing for others. You're not playing for yourself.
Was there a gig? I don't know if it. I presume that studio work came first before the tours, or am I wrong in that?
Uh, well, I don't want to say you're wrong. What I'm going to say is that it's all kind of together. You know, again, yes, there are nuances that once you really get into, excuse me, the career of making records, you understand that your audience is pretty wide in that you're playing to microphones. You're doing your best to touch the drums in a way that's going to capture the best sonic and emotional energy for the microphones, for the record, for the artist, and what their vision is and how they are going to view their fanship. So I have to, use my imagination to present a similar mindset, but that also happens in the gig. If if an Irish artist calls me and says, "Hey, I want you to play some gigs," well, I got to figure out what that means to them, what the beats are for them, and what the energy is. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah, or if the jazz artist calls, I got to figure out what that energy is. Just because, if if Kenny Barron calls me, he might require something a little different than if Herbie Hancock was to call.
Right.
It's jazz. They're both pianists, but they don't play the same types of music. Not really. To the average listener, it might sound like that, but once you get into it, you start understanding how to break it down and give the type of swing or the type of bop or the type of flow that's needed, the type of energy to have the communication exchange. And really, the only way that that music works is if they feel like they can talk to you and they feel like you can listen. You know, and working with Taj, for instance, you know, Taj's thing is a world that you have to be involved in. He's telling you where the beat is. He's telling you where the spirit is. You have to be adept enough and willing enough to allow yourself to enjoy the ride. Go along with what that is. Don't try to force your own will on it. It doesn't make sense. It'll be rough for you. So you're being you're giving. You have to be a giving natured person, musician, willing.
Okay, so I look at your resume or your accomplishments, your recordings, and the people you've worked with. So I wonder, does much of it start because of your work in the studio and then you're taken out on tours, or
No,
does it not work that way at all?
I mean, we're in a day and age where who buys records?
Right, but
You
I
know,
mean, in the past, the fact that you worked with Eric Burden for many, many years, that obviously gave you exposure. But was there a break with somebody that upped your profile that helped you get more phone calls?
uh, I don't know. I mean, I was only with the animals for maybe 3 or 4 years or something like that, and I won't say that there's always like a singular thing that led to. Sometimes that happens. If you're I worked with Stephen Bruton for years, and through him, you know, I was able to work with the majority of many artists that were connected to Delbert McClinton, for instance,
Right.
Teresa James, Leroy Parnell, Gary Nicholson, you know, and the list goes on. But it just really just depends on, there's no one path, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe someone heard a record and go, oh, I like what you did there. But many times it could just be a phone call between two cats. Hey, I don't know, man. Well, I've been thinking about using Brannen. What do you think? And then you don't know what they're asking. I know he can play, but you know, is he a hang? Can he hang okay? I never really spent any time on what's his personality. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, or people know you can hang. They already know. Oh yeah, he's cool. I'm gonna hire him. Or it could just be a cold call. Hey, we got a recommendation, from so and so, and we'd like to know if you'd be interested in the audition. We'd like to know if you'd be interested in these dates with no audition. You know, it happens all kinds of ways. Hey, I saw you playing on uh, Access TV channel show, or hey, man, I saw you playing on The View with blah blah blah. Those are just, man, we enjoyed what we heard. We went and we saw you play these other shows. We looked on YouTube. We looked on your Instagram. We think might be a good fit for us. Here, check our music out. Let us know. You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
uh, these are nowadays, social media presence and video. It's like I heard somewhere where even as a fan, it didn't happen unless you have a selfie. It's like
Right.
who gets autographs anymore?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like
Hmm.
that was an art in and of itself, or an integral piece of the experience to bring back a signed ticket, a signed piece of paper, a set list. Not many people still do this, but often the currency is the selfie. The currency is the video, and so the lines of communication are activated in different ways now.
Are you a very different musician in the studio versus in live performance?
Mm, I mean, I'm always trying to play for the music, and so that's going to suit you no matter where you go. I can't say that about everybody, but sometimes people think, when you play a record, well, live, you got to bring out all the chops. You got to bring out all the stops and do all the gyrations and make people really know that you got more than what they heard on the record. Well, if the music calls for that, okay. But, again, when I'm in the studio, you know, if I get called to play a jazz record, it's kind of foolish to go in and just start like playing gospel chops fills, you know, or if I'm making a country record, for me to start kind of jazzing it out. You know what I mean? It's like, you want to bring comfort. And so part of what I'm trying to get at in this explanation is that you want to speak the language of the day, the language of the moment. And so if you're playing in the studio, whatever you're working on, that's what you're working on. That's what you're bringing to it. So do you play different? Well, you play according to what's necessary. You know, you're getting tones. If I'm playing a pop record, well, I'm gonna play with the touch and intensity that the song is gonna need, so that they can get the right levels of the sound that are gonna match that. I don't want to be tipping and playing kind of a jazzy thing, which then I blow out the mics because I didn't give them what they needed in the beginning. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. So, but you basically just have to, you know, live in studio. Yes, there are differences, and no, there aren't differences. You know,
I mean, obviously, you've done a lot of session work. You've also done a lot of tours. What's your favorite thing to do in what you do?
all of it, because even sometimes, you know, even though I have not made a full career out of education at teaching, I enjoy that too.
Can you talk
You
about
know,
that? What do you do?
well, for a 3 or 4 year period, I was, for instance, an adjunct drum specialist for the University of Texas at Austin, the jazz department. And so what I did there was I taught drum lessons to undergrads primarily and percussion majors, as well as a couple of grad students through the years. And, so there I was sort of tasked with helping them understand, fundamentals of jazz drumming, and the tools that you would use and just the concepts. And so, if someone was, not understanding how to communicate all the limbs together, I had to work there. If they were too heavy with one of the limbs, like with the bass drum, I had to go, okay, well, you got to lighten up there, and this is how you do that. And then it takes them listening to records and practicing and playing and putting it into use. And so I'm just kind of coaching along as they're honing their craft. And in college, it's for a grade for them. They got to get a good report from me at the end of the semester. And then I sort of am, at the time I was like also a judge for their performances, the juries that they would do. And so then, you're critiquing, you're giving pointers, you're grading. And, but then if it was away from school, if I just had private students that were young or old, sometimes I'd have students that were my age, younger than me, or well, older than me. And it's like, well, they might even have played drums longer than I played drums, but they saw something in me as a teacher that they wanted to embody, and that's the first question I always ask. What do you think I'm going to give you? I want to understand what they think I'm there for. You know, and most of teaching is here. It's not here. So I do a lot of communicating. Probably more of that than actually showing people what to do. Because as it stands now, 2026, you can see everything you ever want to see on YouTube.
Yeah. What do you get out of that, of teaching?
Just sharing. Because even sometimes, even with a young student, um, I'm having to hear their experience too. You know, and I can hear people's walk. Their walk in life just with the way they pick the sticks up, and place them on a symbol. I already know it's a it's a it's a guide for me. You know where they come from. Sometimes you get people that are sort of advanced. They can play. They're not coming to you because they don't know how to hold a drumstick. They're coming to you because there's a desire in their heart to 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 know that they're on the right path. Sometimes people are very skilled. Sometimes people come to me and I think they can play certain things better than I can play them. But I have a certain amount of experience that can help guide the the mindset that might be sort of uh, what do you call just not as confident, or have doubt or question, or maybe they have a concept and they think that this is working, but obviously it's not. Otherwise, you wouldn't be seeking me out or seeking out an instructor. So what I get out of it is just the humanity in it. I get a chance to share and sort of reiterate my own concepts and challenge my own concepts. And get a chance, like even in this interview, I'm having to think about these questions and make sure I don't sound like a doofus or like arrogant or something like that. And you know, it's a fine balance as as an educator, I think.
Do you remember when you got confident as a player?
I mean, I started with it, but I also have a lot of humility, and I was also even at a point, even now, man, many people struggle with I don't want to say a sense of self, but like just like different things within your journey. And so I'm not without fault with my own doubts or questions or need to resolve certain things. Like sometimes in business, there could be conflict, and you have to resolve those conflicts, and you want to make sure that yes, you're heard, but also for me personally, I want to make sure that I'm being and speaking professionally, and not speaking strictly from a place of emotion or speaking strictly from whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's like I want to be able to get my point across and let people know in a broad sense what this thing is all about, especially if I feel like I'm dealing with an immature or amateurish way. Well, we're all here to learn. We're all here on this plane to learn, you know, and even the greats if they are willing, they can still learn from the youth or from the lesser known. You know, it's like, again, I think like, Sonny Rollins, who just passed away, great saxophonist. I think he probably spent his whole life in search of trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
There's a great lesson that, when Coltrane joined the band, Miles Davis's band, and Sonny was there. It's knowledge that he spent about a year trying to figure out who he was on the saxophone, and he was already established. He was already recorded. He was a record. He was an artist, you know, but he had to like go back to the drawing board to him, to himself, and prove to himself, oh, okay, this is the direction and the path that I need to take. So he spent hours shedding on the bridge, on the Brooklyn Bridge. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, we all owe it to ourselves to just always, stay open and leave the arrogance at the door. So there's always room for growth and sort of checking yourself, you know. So that leaves a humble space. So, you know, you think you're over there killing it. No, you might not be.
Um, are there things that you're consciously aware that you need to improve about your playing?
Always.
And can you maybe articulate what that might be?
Well, it, it's harder to figure out what that might not be. You know, it's like, again, when you're working with individuals, the goal is to make those individuals happy, to bring, to uplift the situation. Because sometimes people will try to, interject something that they just learned onto a gig, and sometimes it's, oh, you've been checking out more of this, that helps us, you know. Oh, hi, yeah, I never heard you do that. Sometimes these things are valuable, but you have to choose what's valuable. And so a lot of times I'm just hoping to improve my mindset. And of course, there's the technique of, different technical things that you can always be sort of, aware of, playing with certain dynamics, like playing, like, I met you through ties. I'll give ties as an example. So, I've played with many vocalists, or many artists that sang. And one of the telltale signs of a accomplished, musician is when the vocalist starts singing, that you become more of a support. So that means if your volume is here, you're going to bring it down so that it leaves more space for the vocals
Right.
to be heard. And and maybe, with playing with Ruthie Foster, I had to learn that her, her breath and like the way she sings is expansive. So she might want to move a phrase just a little longer. So if I'm already trying to set up the next section, the bridge or the chorus, and I'm playing a fill over the top of that, well, I missed an opportunity to help her create a story, right?
Hmm.
And so, but with Taj doesn't want the drums to break down. In fact, he wants the drums to be a leading voice without saying it. He never told me that, but he definitely said, "You mean I need to hear that smack 2 and 4, hit the kick, hit the snare, you know." So I was thinking, well, I'm gonna break it down for him so he can. Nah, he didn't need that because he's gonna sing over that, and he wants you to be right there pushing him, right? And so again, I'm trying to make him happy. I'm trying to give Ruthie space that maybe she didn't even realize she needed. until it was there. Oh, I can do that. That's I see her thinking that. I see her utilizing the space I think I'm creating. It comes back
But
to
how
me.
much communication is there between you and the artist?
It's all unspoken unless it is, until it is spoken. You know,
And I guess it's not a good thing when it's spoken.
no. It can be a great thing. You want to do your job to the best of your abilities. And sometimes you don't know what that is unless they go, hey, yeah, I need you to tighten that up. I need you to, to do more there. I need you to, you know, uh, don't let me lay back the tempo. You keep it steady. You know, actually, there, can you lay the tempo back because I need to keep it steady. And it could go either way. And sometimes they might need to communicate a subtle change or shift. And I worked some with Boz Scaggs, and he was funny. He was kind of like, you know Jeff Porcaro? Oh, of course, Jeff Porcaro, the great Jeff Porcaro, man. Played on tons of hit records and everything. And I know he played on your record. He was my best friend. And I said, oh well, man, I know that must have really been painful when he passed, man. I'm sorry. I know you guys now it's apparent to me that you guys created this work together, you know,
Mhm.
it means something more than just him being a studio drummer. I didn't know that, until this conversation. And so he's like, that's right. He's like, so I need you to start there and stay there. And that was the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. Start there and stay there. And that just meant that whatever I ask of you, it's not personal. I need this to so that I can do what I need to do, you know. And most times musicians don't allow themselves to understand that criticisms or looks or communications or non-communications is not always personal. It's just not, they're just trying to do their job the best to the best of the artist, to the best of their abilities. And sometimes they need it the way they need it. And it might come out in a way that sounds harsh or cruel or judgmental. But again, it's in the act and it's for the music.
When did you learn that?
Uh, it took a minute, you know, because I came through the ranks of playing with a lot of people that, which is not to say I didn't give, it was the people that were encouraging, which is not to say that people didn't sort of ask me to do things, but I understood, wow, I'm doing a lot of things right without them asking, you know. And so then at a certain point, you'll get an artist that goes, yeah, I need you to, just keep the energy up, like keep it up. Like I hear it lagging, and in your mind, you're thinking, I haven't changed a thing, but to them, something that something that's missing. They need that push, and so why struggle? Why have it be an issue? Just make the adjustment, get paid, go home. It's simple.
What's the greatest thing you've learned from playing the drums?
Uh, that uh, you know, I I was gonna say something, but it's everything. I've learned how to navigate marriages. I've learned how to raise children. I've learned how to speak, um, my truth. I've learned how to communicate with the Creator. I've learned how to listen to the creator. I've learned how to put food on the table. You know, what haven't I learned? What have I missed? Everything. You know, the drums has led me to, drums led me to you.
Yeah.
You know, the drums connects me with family. You know, family that I wouldn't see unless I was on tour. Drums keep me connected. Drums keep me alive. They keep my mind, my body, and my spirit intact. So I learned how to do that through continuing to do it.
Do you still love it?
100%. Yeah, that's never waned. You know, I remember one time I was, and 40 plus years I've only done this. So money comes and goes, you know, more so than if I had a day job working for some corporate entity that could subsidize my needs for my home, my household. But I don't, I don't do that. So, it allows me the flexibility, uh, but it's all on me. It's all on me, you know. And, wait, what was the question again? I was thinking something else. I was going to go somewhere else. Ask me that one more time.
Well, I mean, you still love it.
I'd still love it. And the point is that, I really am, I'm often faced with just the truths about cost of living, so there could be times where, I'm at a bar and I'm thinking, man, the bartenders are making more than me. I'm playing this gig every week and I see them counting tips at the end of the night. And it's like, damn, I only made blah, blah, blah. And looks like they're making, mm-hmm, you know, and,
Right.
and then I think about it, start doing the math and I'm like, well, let me see. I was here for 4 hours and they've been here for about 11. So what's better? It's like, and do they love it? Maybe some. I know some career bartenders that are really good at what they do and that I love as humans, and respect. So I'm not, downplaying that. I'm just saying that wasn't the path, even though I was hurting, that I needed to go down. Or, looking at jobs and online or back in the day in newspapers or going to businesses. Hey, you guys need anything? If I did that, it didn't last because gigs started happening, and it would have been a conflict of time and interest. What am I? Am I a maitre d or am I a drummer? So I never went down the road. I never gave myself a real out.
With all the things that you've been involved with, the tours, the recordings, is there anything that stands out above the rest?
What do you mean? Like experience wise?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, it's all relative. It's all great because I stay as present as I can. So, you know, the only times when it kind of sucks is when, you get a call to do something, a one off, and that artist is just really sour and they're just kind of going through the motions or they're in their head and verbally they just keep comparing you to the LA band. Well, then bring them motherfuckers in. Like obviously you don't have the production and the clout, the backing that you think you should have, that you think that you're worthy of, and that you think that our playing as a band or my playing as a drummer is less than. Well, you can figure it out. I don't have to do your gig. You know what I mean? That's just what I mean. Sometimes people come with this sour chop, and it's like, well, it makes for a longer night.
So that's the negative.
Yeah.
But I wonder what's like, is there like a tour that you look back on fondly or an experience you look
Oh man,
back on very fondly?
countless. There's too many. Countless. I remember one time, man, one of the coldest rehearsals I ever did was with a saxophone player named Ernie Watts. Ernie played on hundreds of top 40 albums, as well as being a great jazz saxophonist and just a amazing human. And so I show up to rehearsal, and just his level of patience. I'm setting up the drums, and he's just sitting there very calmly, zen even. You know, and I get completely set up, and the band is completely set up, and I open the book charts, and he looks around the room, takes a breath, and he's not off his rocker on any level. He doesn't really know us, you know. He looks around the room, and he greeted us with 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 charm and humility and enthusiasm. So professional, right? It's okay. Well, any questions? We hadn't even started. He's asking if we have questions. He's like, well, no, let's see. Okay, well, let's open the books. The first chart is this number. And then he just went from the beginning, line by line, and we talked it through. This is where the repeat is. Any questions? It was like, how can there be questions?
Hmm.
No, there are no questions. Let's play, you know. So then we start playing, and it was like we had played it our whole life because everybody's skilled. And then he left no room for disaster by being so patient and being so giving. You know what I'm saying? So not everybody's
Hmm.
built the same. Some people are not as focused, therefore they can't give you as much. I play with several of these sort of let's call them smooth jazz artists that they act like they're doing you a favor by you being able to put their name on your resume. And it's like, no, it doesn't really work that way. I could stay at home for this money. For the amount of work I had to do, you could at least show, you know, some mutual respect that we are here. I'm helping you. You're paying me, therefore you're helping me. You need a musician. Let's come to this as, we're in a boat of similar levity. You know, but again, that doesn't always happen. You know, so yeah, what you learn in the whole thing is everybody's different. You just keep it pro. You know,
My final question. Do you have goals at this point? Musical goals?
I was thinking about something this morning, and a couple things. I spent years as being an artist. Now, what is an artist versus a session musician or an a call on call drummer or a side musician? An artist is somebody who books the gigs, pays for the gas, rents the van, books the hotels, pays for the hotels, and promotes the gigs. And if nobody shows up, you still got to pay everybody. And that means that at the end, you might come in the hole. You could have done the whole thing not only for free, but you gave up your energy, your resources, your money. and it's uh it's uh it's not for everybody. It's very humbling, and I've had some triumphs. I've had the opportunities to take my band various places around the world, even up your way, you know, and some of those were for you know clout, and got some more gigs out of it, and then got paid, and everything was fine. Went home, it was great. Nobody got sick, you know, and um, and then some where it was just like, man, I'm gonna be on the phone on the way home asking, hey man, can I come play some gigs with you so I can make any kind of bread? I'll do $50, $100, or whatever. I need something, and goal wise, I don't know if I've given it up just yet. It's a hard road, but I think there's still something left to say as an artist. There's still music to write. There's still gifts to be presented for nourishment and healing. And then as a side musician, I feel the same way. There's still someone's story that needs to be added to, you know, by seeing the band I'm playing with, you know, whether that's I told you I play with like Nelly Furtado and stuff like that, working with
Hmm.
some of the artists that are in the pop vein, and it seems like, well, those songs, to someone who might be a snob, they might think, well, that music is not substantial or whatever. But music gets people through life, bro. You know what I'm saying? And so
Hmm.
a song that sounds as trivial as Nelly's Man Eater, you know, or Jody Wiley's music, or Janet Jackson's music, or whomever, sounds like these are carefree pop tunes. Well, music is a vibration that brings, you know, again, healing and centering, and it sort of lets people know that they're in the right place. And so if I can do that just by saying yes to a text, hey, can you play this gig? Or an email, or a DM, or a phone call, or whatever the case is, and I don't have to put my neck on the line to put asses in seats, but I still get a chance to tell and help tell a story and help someone find their way in life. And yeah, that is the goal, because that helps me find my way in life.
Well said. Brandon, thank you so much. Loved watching you play with Taj Mahal. I hope I
Oh
get to
man,
see you play again.
yeah, that gig. It was the Toronto show.
Yeah.
What's the name of that place? They had the wilderness inside there.
The Elgin Theater, I believe, or the Winter Gardens.
Yeah, yeah. That was. I remember that being a good show. Um, yeah, that was
It was a great
that was a
show.
great, it was a great evening, and Todd is an amazing individual, man. Again, man, this gentleman is 84 years old. Like he says in his own show, let's see your grandfather do this. Yeah, that man is something else. I hope that I can make it to that age and beyond. I wish him and all the artists I've ever worked with well, even if they've been jerks. You know, he wasn't. He was a fine human. But yeah, man, this is again, I see it as a community, and I just hope that that's infectious.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this.